Senator, thank you so much for. I know it's been a real slow news day, and
yes, absolutely.
Actually, let's just get to it. Mitt Romney was on this stage.
Could I just interrupt one thing?
Yeah, sure.
David Bradley has been a saint in helping the families of those who have fallen into the hands of ISIS, and particularly a young woman from Prescott, Arizona named Kayla Mueller. And I would just give my heartfelt thanks to David Bradley, who has done things above and beyond for the families of those who have been held hostage in foreign places. So I'd like to thank David Bradley.
Thank you. I wouldn't presume to speak for our chairman, David Bradley, but I think David might say that he is as grateful to you for all the time and effort that you also put in on those issues. And I happen to know behind the scenes that you were talking with Kayla's parents over a very long period of time, along with Senator Donnelly in his case and other members of Congress who were working on the hostages. So thank you on behalf of David and our team.
Thank you.
Mitt Romney sat on this stage a bit earlier and said, many people may love President Obama for a variety of things, but his foreign policy has been an utter disaster. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, we have an hour or two, I guess, together here. I think that there was a misconception on the part of the president about what America's role in the world is. It was first demonstrated, I believe, in Tehran in 2009, when after a corrupt election, the Iranian people rose up and they were chanting in English, "Obama, Obama, are you with us or are you with them?" And we did not say a word on their behalf. I can understand President Obama and many Americans' desire to sort of withdraw. There was fatigue over Afghanistan and Iraq, very understandable. We were in wars for an incredible length of time. So the weariness of the American people was clearly evident. And I think the president felt that he was reflecting that. But in my view, the fundamental failure on the part of the president was the absolute exceptionalism of American leadership. Steve, you know, there is no nation in the world. And we enjoy the benefits of being the most influential nation on earth. God knows we do. But also, there's a debit side of the ledger, and that is when we have to confront crises around the world. And I believe that the president withdrew, and certainly I can tell you from my visits with countries in the Middle East and their leaders, they believe America has withdrawn. That's why you see the Saudis now buying $7 billion worth of military equipment from Russia, from UAE, $5 billion or something like that. So they're hedging their bets in the region because the perception that America is vacated its role. And could I also add, my friends, this latest thing, we're going to talk more about it, but this is the first time since 1973, when Anwar Sadat threw the Russians out of Egypt, that you are seeing Russia playing a major influential role in the Middle East. And so we could go on, but I believe that it was not a belief in American exceptionalism.
I want to talk about Russia and what is unfolding today. I want to ask you one other question before we go there, which is it really completely fair to hang this on the president? When you were running for president of the United States, many people around the world saw a United States that was showing limits everywhere, seemed overextended in the Middle East, seemed overextended financially, that rather than being the nation that had no limits and boundaries, the world became convinced that we weren't able to do all the things that we're doing. The biggest consequences, you saw a change in the behavior of allies who said, well, America wasn't. That was before President Obama came in. And I'm wondering if you think there's been you may have criticisms of President Obama, but is it fair not to look at what happened before?
Well, first of all, could I say I have an old line that after I lost, I slept like a baby. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. Anyway, I disagree in one area, and that's Iraq. Because in 2007, my presidential campaign was dead. And I said at that time, I would rather lose a war lose a campaign than lose a war. And we went on this no surrender tour the fall of 2007. One of the seminal moments in the history of the Senate, David Petraeus and Ryan Crocker testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee and convinced enough of my colleagues that the surge would work. And by 2008, the surge had worked. So we weren't losing everywhere. In fact, we were winning at great cost, as you know, of American blood and treasure in places like Fallujah and Ramadi that are now under ISIS. So I would disagree with that, but I would agree that we were in the middle of a financial crisis that, you could only compare to almost to the Great Depression. I mean, it was that severe. And so Americans wanted to turn away, and your point is well made that they had so much trouble internally with a financial collapse that they probably thought, hey, wait a minute, we haven't got the time, energy, or the funds to keep up our efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And by the way, I would also argue at that point, Afghanistan was largely under control too.
So Russia today, Syria, bombing has broken out. Russia declared it was bombing ISIS targets. Of course, many people looking at a map. Jeff Goldberg said everything Russia bombs will now be called an ISIS target, but you came out and disputed what those targets were.
Well, one of the enclaves is around Homs, and everybody knows that that is a Free Syrian Army and a very vital area in that part of Syria. And that was about the first target. My friends, it's amazing when you think about it, because if Putin had wanted to deceive us, he might have bombed some other targets first. First day of bombing, after the military attaché in Baghdad informed us an hour before the bombing started. And now that you've seen the pictures, and apparently a number of people were killed, including 7 children, in this bombing attack by Russia. I mean, it's a blatant, in-your-face move. And then, of course, they say, just as he said, there are no Russian troops in Crimea, they're saying, no, we were only attacking ISIS. This is a testimony to the lack of concern that Russia has about America's reaction to their actions. That's the only way you can interpret this. And there are plenty of ISIS targets, but they picked the one place where a Free Syrian Army enclave was, and a pretty successful one that's been doing rather well in the fight against Bashar Assad. And so now we are seeing the Russians propping up Bashar Assad, along with the Iranians, establishing their base or ensuring their base on the Mediterranean, and then becoming really, literally a major player in the Middle East. And we see our Secretary of State calling Lavrov 3 times. What's going to happen? Meetings in New York. What are you going to do? They don't say, and an hour before the strikes begin, their military attaché in Baghdad informs us. My friends, this is the ultimate disrespect, as well as actions that are in a way that I think there's one place where I agree with the administration. This is going to ratchet up the casualties and the strife. It isn't going to reduce it, because we've shown in the past, you bomb people and you are recruiting people for ISIS.
What would you do differently if you were the commander-in-chief as opposed to the chairman of the Armed Services Committee? And I don't ask that facetiously.
Sure.
I mean, I said, what would you actually do to change the environment? And if I can add, to do it in a way that keeps the U.S. from being dragged into a quagmire, because that's been part of the president's rationale.
Sure. A person that you and I admire as much as anybody in America as far as the military is concerned is David Petraeus. He and Jack Keane and Kagan and a couple others were the architects of the surge, as we all know. But more importantly, David Petraeus is probably the most important combination I've ever seen of leadership, inspirational leadership, and intellect. It's amazing the way I used to see him when Lindsey Graham and Joe Lieberman and I would go to Baghdad and Kabul, the way the young officers particularly would literally idolize and would do anything thanks to his inspirational leader. He testified before our committee. He laid out a plan before our committee, and it basically consisted of stop the barrel bombing, establish a buffer zone, arm the Free Syrian Army, more boots on the ground in the form of, I'm not talking about tens of thousands now, but in the form of forward air controllers, some special operations people, that kind of specialized areas that we don't have today. I think that David Petraeus laid out, and I'll be glad to send anybody in this room the text of his particularly opening statement where he laid out that, which I believe could be a winning strategy. So it's there if we want to do it. And as you know, he and then Secretary of State Clinton and Secretary of State Panetta 3 years ago basically argued for the arming and training of the Free Syrian Army, and the president turned it down.
You were a candidate for president from your party.
We have to talk about it?
Yeah, and no, but I mean, you were, as you said, your campaign was dead in 2007. You brought it back 2008. It was important. And when you look at the field of candidates from your party today, who do you think has a sophisticated understanding, even a general understanding of the issues you just shared?
I think that a lot of them do. I also
name a couple.
Okay, I would. Well, my favorite, of course, and who I will stay with until no matter what happens, is Lindsey Graham, because he is my dearest and beloved friend. Petraeus named us the three amigos, Lieberman and Lindsey Graham and I. I think somebody figured out between Baghdad and Kabul, we went like 35 times. Wow. And to be every fourth.
I thought it was more like Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon.
Sort of. every 4th of July, most Christmases, we were over there. And when I would go home, Lindsey Graham would serve his active duty there. David Petraeus described him as the most knowledgeable on the detainee issue. Lindsey Graham is an Air Force Reserve lawyer, colonel. So obviously I think Lindsey understands the best. Some of the others, like John Kasich, for example, and maybe Chris Christie, and some of the others, you don't have to be a total expert. And the best example I can give you is Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan, as you know, Steve, came to the presidency, he'd been governor of the state of California and a movie actor. But he had, one, the right instincts, and two, surrounded himself with the best and brightest that he could find in this country.
Donald Trump says he's going to surround himself with the best and brightest.
I'm glad to hear that. So I think Marco Rubio is excellent on these issues. I think Kasich, a successful governor, knows how to lead. Chris Christie, I like his attitude. He's in-your-face guy like me. I think. Let's see, who else could I name? I like Carly a lot. I think Carly is a wonderful person. She was part of my campaign, and I tried to help her in California. I think she has the right instincts. I'm trying to think who I miss now, but I would be very comfortable with.
You'll hear it all in your Twitter. Senator John McCain.
Yeah, why did he leave me? Why did he leave me out? I want to say that I could be comfortable with a lot of them.
When Jon Stewart was leaving, did you really tweet out "So long, jackass"?
I didn't tweet it out. They brought a puppet down of Jon Stewart, see, and so we did a video, and I said, yeah, and then they said, Jon Stewart doesn't know what he's talking about, and I stopped and I said, so long, jackass. They thought it was one of the highlights of that final thing. Look, I respect Jon Stewart. We had our disagreements, but he made an enormous contribution in that he got young people thinking about many of these issues, and that's to his great credit.
You said today, so I hope that the American people understand how serious this is and that this rogue dictator named Vladimir Putin, who's a thug and a bully, can only understand a steadfast and strong American policy that brings American strength back. We're still the strongest nation in the world. Now it's time for us to act like it. This is a very bold statement. You know, Russia is a member of the P5, just cooperated us with the Iran deal, which I know that you think it was a bad deal, but it's a different world that you're looking at in terms of, you know, potentially returning back to kind of a hard-edged rivalry that some people typify as a Cold War. Are you advocating that kind of posture again?
I don't think that it's a return to the Cold War. We can't forget that the Cold War was a situation where two nuclear-armed nations were literally, and we found out in the Cuban Missile Crisis, very close to a nuclear exchange. I don't see that scenario. But what I do see is Vladimir Putin, an old KGB agent, and that's what he is. By the way, you know, my dear friends, I was sanctioned by Vladimir Putin. I couldn't go to Siberia again last August, so, but...
Ben Rhodes was sanctioned too. He was on stage this morning.
Was he?
Yeah, he was proud of being sanctioned.
You know, does the guy get it, that this is the best thing that could happen to me in Arizona? Thank you, Vlad, you know. Anyway, so what I think we are in is a period of great tension as it appears, but not true, that America is in decline and Vladimir Putin's ambition, which he stated openly. I mean, friends, these are no secrets. He said the worst event of the 20th century was the breakup of the then Soviet Union, as you know. He wants to restore the Russian Empire, of which he views Ukraine as a fundamental part, the Baltics, etc. And the interesting thing about this new adventure, it's the first time out of the near abroad that he was expanding into. Very interesting. So what I think Vladimir Putin is, he is a thug and a bully, and bullies understand when they can get away with being a bully. And so when we see this military, this is a good example, we see this military buildup of these airplanes. By the way, some of them are fighters that fight against other aircraft. ISIS has no aircraft. But anyway, while this buildup is going on, what happens? John Kerry calls 3 times to Lavrov and says, hey, what's going on? Is that the way we act when we see these kinds of things unfolding?
Did you call John Kerry and say, what's going on?
No.
Yeah.
But no, and you know, it's kind of sad because he and I have been acquaintances and indeed friends for many, many years, but I just can't countenance this trying to be good pals with Lavrov. I don't get that. There's an old, talk about KGB, he wasn't KGB, he's an old Soviet apparatchik. But so we are seeing a nation that is being perceived as withdrawing and somewhat weak. Now, my friends, very quickly, you see Ukraine continue to be Pac-Man type small bites by the Russians. The Chinese, of course, as we know, have in the last year have filled in 1,000 acres of land and built 3 runways in gross violation of international law.
South China Sea.
In the South China Sea. Obviously, the hacking, we had a hearing yesterday, as many of you know, on cyber. We still don't have a policy in face of this threat, whether we try to thwart an attack, what we do in the case of an attack, and whether we respond in case of attack.
So give us your zinger.
Still haven't been decided.
Give us your zinger on cyber in the little time we have, because I want to hear what you think our strategy on cyber should be. That
whenever there's an attack and we can identify where it's from, like for example with Chinese, we've identified, as you know, the building in Beijing where the PLA hangs out, that we will do everything we can to preempt it. We will respond in kind, but also it will trigger sanctions on people or organizations or even countries in some case. My friends, the greatest industrial thefts in history have taken place in the last 10 to 15 years with cyber hacking. General Dempsey said, we, in a case of potential confrontation, we're ahead of all of our potential adversaries in one area except one, cyber. So we've got one hell of a lot of work to do to get this issue under control. I hope that the Chinese leader is going to do as he said, that we're going to have a ceasefire, et cetera, and I also hope that pigs fly.
Can you imagine a point at which cyber attacks or a cyber incident would or should lead to a military response?
Well, there's the doomsday scenario, as you know, of one of these nations, and the Russians are ahead of everybody else to shut down satellites. That would clearly be an act of war. I mean, I don't think you could describe it any other way. So you'd have to gauge the intensity of an act, but sanctions seem to be effective in this day and age because the world's economy is so inextricably tied that sanctions are an effective tool, as we have found out.
Senator, just as we wrap up, this has been a great discussion, but yeah, I would like to keep going.
I would have liked to have heard some insults from the audience.
Is there any aspect of your job that's fun right now?
Well, working on
anything you enjoy, anything you're positive
about? I enjoy
about?
the defense, doing the defense authorization bill. I enjoy working with my colleagues, frankly, on both sides of the aisle. We have a very good relationship on the Armed Services Committee. Jack Reed and I are good friends. He was poorly educated. He went to West Point, but and so I enjoy that. I enjoy the friendship of my fellow members. I enjoy trying to and doing things to help the state of Arizona, and I've never been busier, except you know when. And look, I really want to end up with this very quickly, and I know we're running out of time. The future of America is bright. We are now energy independent. Some of old geezers in here remember when we used to wait in gas lines for hours because OPEC had their hand on the supply line. Now it's never going to happen. We're energy independent, and someday we'll be exporting energy to Eastern Europe to free them from their dependence on Russia. Second of all, manufacturing jobs have dramatically improved. If you go to one of these assembly lines, my friends, it's an incredible experience. Third of all, if I could just mention it, there is this device, my friends. This is incredible. This is changing the world for better and for worse. This is changing the world. It may be made in China, but it was invented here. I was at a thing out at Aspen where they had Elizabeth Holmes and the guy from Snapchat and the guy from Instagram. I mean, these young people are amazing. I went out to Venice, California, where I don't usually hang out. I was invited there, and a guy met me.
Muscle Beach?
Guy met me at the door. Guy met me at the door, 25 years old, wearing jeans and a T-shirt. Hi, I'm the CEO of Snapchat. $4 billion company, Snapchat. Anybody here use Snapchat? I sure as hell don't. Anyway, so I'm optimistic about America. We have a bright future. We're still the greatest and best nation on earth.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator John McCain.
Thank you.